There's a war happening inside the Indiana Fever's front office right now. Not a war over wins and losses. Not a war over draft picks or trade targets. A war over a list. 5 names. That is all they get. 5. And the brutal part is they need at least 6. Because today is the deadline. Today is the day Indiana has to look at a roster full of players who bled for this franchise and decide who gets protection and who gets thrown to the wolves. And if they get this wrong, they could lose the player that Caitlin Clark personally begged to come back. A player the entire locker room rallied around. A player the fans fell in love with over the course of one unforgettable season. And here's the part that makes this even harder to stomach. If she goes, Indiana gets absolutely nothing in return. No compensation, no draft pick, no trade. She's just gone. So today we are breaking down every single angle of this decision. Who is safe? Who is on the edge? And why this one choice could define Indiana's next 3 seasons. If you want to stay on top of everything happening with this team right now, hit that subscribe button below. Coverage on this expansion draft is going up constantly, and you do not want to miss the April 3rd breakdown. Now, let us get into it, how the 2026 expansion draft actually works. Before we get into Indiana's specific nightmare, you need to understand the mechanics of what is happening here, because the rules this year are more dangerous than anything the league has put in place before. This is not a trade. It is not a free agency window. It is something entirely unique, and once you understand how it works, Indiana's situation will make your stomach drop. On March 25th, 2026, the WNBA officially announced the expansion draft rules. Every existing franchise, all 13 of them, had to submit their full rosters and their protection designations to the league office by today, March 29th. Each team can protect a maximum of 5 players. That is it, 5. Everyone else on the roster is left completely exposed and available to be selected. No exceptions. On April 3rd, the expansion draft airs live on ESPN. Portland Fire and Toronto Tempo, the 2 brand new WNBA franchises, alternate picks across 2 rounds in a snake format. Portland picks first in round 1, Toronto picks second, and then Toronto picks first again in round 2, with Portland closing it out. Each expansion team can select up to 2 players from any single existing team, 1 per round. So if Portland looks at Indiana's exposed list and loves what they see, they can take 1 player in round 1 and come back for a second in round 2. That is potentially 2 players stripped from 1 franchise in a single night. But here is the rule that turns this into something genuinely terrifying for Indiana specifically. Each expansion team is allowed to select 1 unrestricted free agent from the entire exposed pool. Just 1. And if they use that pick on an unrestricted free agent, they do not just add her to the roster. They acquire the exclusive right to negotiate with her and the ability to core her under the new collective bargaining agreement. Coring a player means they can offer her a supermax contract, the highest possible deal under the new CBA, and her former team cannot match it, cannot interfere, cannot do a single thing about it. 1 pick, 1 player, gone forever. And that rule is exactly why Indiana is sitting in the most uncomfortable chair of any franchise heading into this draft. The 3 names that were never debated. Let us start with the easy part, because there are 3 names on Indiana's roster that required absolutely 0 debate. These 3 players are protected the second pen hits paper, and nobody in Indiana's front office lost a single minute of sleep over them. Caitlin Clark, the face of women's basketball in this country. The player who single-handedly shifted the cultural conversation around the WNBA and turned the Indiana Fever into one of the most marketable sports brands in America. Clark is signed through the 2027 season. She is untouchable. She is protection slot number 1. And there is no universe where that is even a discussion. Aaliyah Boston, the 2023 WNBA Rookie of the Year, the anchor in the post, the player who makes Indiana's interior defense something opponents actually have to scheme against. Boston is signed through 2026. She is a cornerstone piece of this roster's identity, and she is protection slot number 2 without anyone at the table raising a single objection. Third is where it gets genuinely interesting. Mikayla Timpson. If you're a casual Fever fan, you might see her name and wonder why she gets a protection slot ahead of more established contributors. Here's why. Timpson was the 19th overall pick in the 2025 WNBA draft. Her rookie season numbers were not flashy. She averaged around 2.5 points per game in limited minutes and was not yet a rotation staple. But that is not the reason she is protected. The reason she is protected is two words: rookie contract. The 2026 WNBA collective bargaining agreement represents the most significant salary increase in the history of women's professional basketball in North America. The pay structure across the entire league is shifting dramatically upward. Players who are making fractions of what their market value should have always been are finally getting closer to fair compensation. That is a genuinely good thing for the sport. But for front offices, it means every new contract signed from this point forward is going to cost significantly more than anything signed under the previous CBA. And Mikayla Timpson still has 2 years remaining on a rookie deal locked in before those new numbers kicked in. That is a cost-controlled building block for multiple seasons that you simply cannot replicate in free agency. You either have it or you do not. And Timpson did not sit still this offseason. She went overseas and showed real growth, putting up legitimate numbers for Zvezda USK Praha in the EuroLeague. She is not just a draft lottery ticket anymore. She is a developing player with real upside, locked in at a price that will look like an absolute bargain 18 months from now. Indiana could not afford to lose that. Timpson is protection slot number 3. Clark, Boston, Timpson, 3 down, 2 left. Kelsey Mitchell might be the most underappreciated player in the WNBA, and if you have followed Indiana closely over the last 2 seasons, you know exactly what she means to this team. When Caitlin Clark was sidelined with injuries in 2025 and Indiana needed someone to carry the offensive load without her, Mitchell stepped up and delivered. She averaged over 18 points per game and was the primary reason the Fever stayed competitive enough to push through a playoff run without their franchise player at full strength. She is a legitimate scorer, a clutch performer, and someone who has earned genuine loyalty from both the front office and the fan base. Here is the complication. Kelsey Mitchell is an unrestricted free agent heading into 2026. Her contract expired. She is technically available to any team in the league, including any expansion franchise willing to make an aggressive offer. General Manager Amber Cox has said publicly and repeatedly that re-signing Mitchell is the absolute top priority for Indiana this offseason. Everyone in that organization wants her back, and that is precisely why she has to be on the protection list. Under the expansion draft rules, if Indiana wants to maintain the core designation on Mitchell, meaning the exclusive right to negotiate with her and offer her a supermax contract before anyone else gets involved, she has to be protected. If she is left exposed and an expansion team decides to spend their 1 UFA pick on Mitchell, Indiana loses all of that leverage instantly. Portland or Toronto could lock her into a supermax deal on the new CBA, and one of Indiana's most important returning players will be building a new franchise in a different city. Mitchell is protection slot number 4. You protect her. You lock in the negotiating power. You do not gamble with your best scorer. That leaves 1 slot. And this is where the whole thing becomes genuinely painful. Lexi Hull and the case for slot 5. Lexi Hull is not a superstar. She will tell you that herself, but she is the kind of player that every winning team needs and almost no team talks about enough until she is gone. Hull's rookie contract just expired, placing her in the category of restricted free agent. That means she can explore offers from other teams, but Indiana holds the right of first refusal. Any offer sheet she signs elsewhere, the Fever can match it and keep her. What Hull brings to the floor is defensive versatility and an understanding of her role that is genuinely rare in a young player. She guards multiple positions. She dies on loose balls. She takes the charges. She does the unglamorous work that keeps a roster functioning when the stars are having off nights. On a team built around Caitlin Clark, having a dependable, smart defensive piece who understands exactly what she is there to do is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Some analysts argue Indiana does not technically need to protect her given her restricted free agent status. If an expansion team tries to take her, the Fever could in theory match whatever offer Portland or Toronto makes and retain her anyway. But the front office is not comfortable leaving that to chance when 2 teams are hunting and the landscape is unpredictable. Protecting Hull locks in complete control. It eliminates any possibility of a bidding war they did not budget for. And in a situation already overflowing with uncertainty, buying yourself one clean, uncomplicated outcome has genuine value. Lexi Hull lands in protection, slot number 5, on nearly every projection you will find, which means Sophie Cunningham is unprotected. And that changes everything. Sophie Cunningham, the player nobody in Indiana wants to lose. This is where the story stops being about contracts and cap math and becomes something much more human. Sophie Cunningham is not just another player on Indiana's roster. She is the emotional heartbeat of this franchise. She is the reason the locker room feels the way it feels. She is the player Caitlin Clark publicly asked to come back, and she might be about to get taken by a team that had nothing to do with building what she and Indiana have together. Cunningham arrived at Indiana through a massive 4-team trade before the 2025 season. And from the moment she stepped into that building, she was different. She was not there to quietly earn minutes and stay out of the way. She was there to compete, to protect her teammates, and to be exactly the kind of presence Indiana needed to complement their superstar. In her first season with the Fever, she accumulated 3 on-court fines. 3, because she refused to let anyone take a cheap shot at Caitlin Clark without facing a consequence. In a league where that kind of physical protectiveness is rare, and at a moment when Clark was the most targeted player in women's basketball, Cunningham drew a line in the sand and dared anyone to cross it. Her on-court numbers before an MCL tear ended her season in August were quietly impressive. She was averaging over 8 points per game and shooting 43% from beyond the three-point line. She was building genuine chemistry with Clark that looked like it was on the verge of becoming something special. The injury robbed both of them and the Indiana fan base of a chance to see how far that pairing could actually go. But everything the team and the coaching staff saw before August pointed towards something legitimately dangerous for opposing defenses. Off the court, the friendship between Cunningham and Clark has become one of the most talked about relationships in women's sports. Clark commented on Cunningham's social media this offseason with a simple message: time to run it back. Cunningham's response was exactly what you would expect from her. Playful, direct, completely unscripted. She basically said she would come back if Clark made her dinner. It is the kind of exchange that fans screenshot and share because it feels real. Because it is real. 2 people who genuinely like each other, not 2 teammates performing for a camera. That kind of chemistry cannot be manufactured and is almost impossible to replace once it is gone. And then there is everything Cunningham has built away from the basketball court. She signed a major podcast deal in 2025 that immediately gained traction. She has sponsorship relationships with brands like Marriott and Quest. She signed with Project 11 for a deal reportedly worth over $2 million annually. Her social media following punches way above her statistical weight because fans connect with her personality as much as her game. She is a content creator, a communicator, a brand unto herself. And all of that makes her exactly the kind of player that a brand new WNBA franchise desperately needs on day one. Sophie Cunningham is the most dangerous, unprotected player in the entire 2026 expansion draft. And both Portland and Toronto know it. Why Indiana might be making a calculated bet. So why would a franchise that clearly loves this player, that has its own superstar publicly lobbying to have her back, make a decision that puts her directly in the crosshairs of 2 hungry expansion teams? The answer is uncomfortable, and it lives entirely in the world of spreadsheets and financial planning. It comes back to Michaela Timpson, and specifically, it comes back to what a rookie contract locked in before the new CBA actually means for a franchise building towards sustained contention. The salary increases under the 2026 collective bargaining agreement are the most significant in WNBA history. Players who have been underpaid for years are finally getting closer to market value, and that is long overdue. But for front offices managing rosters, it also means every new contract signed going forward is going to cost considerably more than what those same players would have cost under the previous structure. When everyone's salary goes up across the board, the teams that have young players locked in an older contract terms gain a competitive advantage that extends beyond just saving money. They gain flexibility. They gain the ability to spend on veteran talent in free agency while keeping their foundation affordable. They gain options that other teams simply do not have. Timpson has 2 years left on her rookie deal at a salary set before the new market inflated. If she continues developing the way her EuroLeague performance suggests she will, Indiana is getting a legitimate, improving rotation center at a fraction of what she would command on the open market. That is not replaceable through a trade. You cannot sign that kind of value in free agency once it is gone. You either have it on your roster or you're trying to rebuild without it. And here is the cold calculation that Amber Cox and the front office are wagering everything on. Sophie Cunningham might not get selected at all. Portland and Toronto each get exactly one unrestricted free agent pick for the entire draft. One, not one per round, one total. And the entire WNBA's exposed list is available to them. Hundreds of players across 13 teams, each franchise leaving multiple names unprotected. Both expansion organizations have specific roster needs that go beyond simply having a great personality on the bench. They need guards. They need posts. They need players who fill real, structural gaps in their rotation. The question is whether either franchise spends their one precious UFA pick on Cunningham, or whether they target someone whose basketball skills fill a more urgent position need. If neither expansion team uses their UFA pick on Cunningham, she clears the draft and hits free agency. And Indiana signs her back under the new CBA. That is the bet. Protect the asset you cannot replace. Trust that the player who wants to be there finds her way home regardless. It is logical. It is defensible. It could also unravel completely in a single moment on draft night. Portland Fire, a city that waited 24 years for this. You have to understand what Portland represents in this expansion draft, because this is not just another franchise checking organizational boxes. Portland has complicated, painful history with the WNBA. The original Portland Fire launched in the year 2000, the same expansion class that brought the Indiana Fever, the Miami Soul, and the Seattle Storm into existence. Portland played 4 seasons before the league contracted and the franchise folded in 2002. An entire generation of Portland sports fans never got to see what that team could have become. The city has been waiting over 2 decades to get its team back. That context shapes how aggressively Portland approaches every single pick in this draft. They're not building patiently and hoping fans show up in year 3. They need to make a statement before a single game is played. They need a player who walks into a press conference and owns the room. Someone who has already built a brand, already proven they can handle a microphone, already demonstrated they're more than just a basketball player. Someone who makes Portland feel like it belongs on the national WNBA stage from day one. Sophie Cunningham checks every single one of those requirements. She is 29 years old, which puts her squarely in the prime of her career with several high-level seasons still ahead. Her podcast reach, her sponsorship portfolio, her social media following, her willingness to be the loudest and most entertaining voice in any setting. A new franchise in Portland could build an entire marketing campaign around Sophie Cunningham before a single regular season tip-off. And if Portland uses their UFA pick on her, they acquire the right to offer a supermax that Indiana simply cannot match. A contract Cunningham might genuinely have difficulty turning down regardless of how much she loves the connections she built in Indiana. Toronto Tempo, what Canada's first WNBA franchise actually needs. Toronto presents a slightly different, but equally serious threat. The Toronto Tempo is not just the first WNBA franchise in Canada. It is the first major women's professional basketball franchise to take root in a market already saturated with established sports teams. The pressure to make women's basketball matter to a Canadian sports audience that already has the Raptors, the Blue Jays, and a deeply ingrained hockey culture is real and significant. Toronto cannot afford to spend their early seasons being invisible or irrelevant. They need instant credibility. They need a player who can generate attention and give casual fans a reason to care before the wins and losses start defining who they are. Cunningham's personality travels. She connects with audiences far beyond Indiana or even WNBA-specific fans because her content and brand partnerships have built her a reach that extends well past traditional basketball media. A Sophie Cunningham jersey representing Canada's first WNBA franchise would be a genuine national story. Her presence in Toronto would be covered by outlets that typically never touch women's basketball. For a franchise making its first impression on an entire country, that kind of earned media is essentially priceless in year 1. Toronto also holds a pick in round 2. If Portland takes someone from Indiana's exposed list in round 1, Toronto has the opportunity to come back and claim a second player from that same list in round 2. Under the right circumstances, Indiana could lose more than just Cunningham. They could lose 2 meaningful contributors from a roster that was already running lean. Caitlin Clark asked Cunningham to run it back, publicly, enthusiastically. And if Cunningham gets drafted away, the answer to that question is something Indiana's front office chose when they submitted that protection list today. That is a weight that does not disappear after the draft. It lingers. It becomes part of the franchise's story whether they want it to or not. The front office may have made the analytically correct decision and still have to live with the emotional fallout of a player the entire fan base loved walking out of the building with nothing coming back in return. This is what makes the expansion draft unlike any other roster move in sports. It is impersonal and absolutely final at the same time. There is no appeal. There is no renegotiation. There is no last-minute intervention. Portland or Toronto calls a name. The name is theirs, and Indiana moves on without her. The history that makes this poetic and painful at the same time. There is a layer to this story that most coverage completely misses, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The Indiana Fever were born in an expansion draft. In the year 2000, the WNBA expanded with 4 new franchises. Indiana was one of them. The Fever were assembled from players left unprotected by existing teams, discarded names that no one felt strongly enough about to shield. From that collection of unprotected players, Indiana eventually built a franchise that produced Tamika Catchings, one of the greatest players in WNBA history. A franchise that won a championship. A franchise that became one of the most respected organizations in women's basketball and eventually became the home of the player who changed everything, Caitlin Clark. And now in 2026, the cycle has come back around. Portland, which was in that same 2000 expansion class, folded in 2002 and has been gone for over 2 decades. They're back. They are coming to the expansion draft with the same energy Indiana once had, hungry and desperate, and willing to take whatever they can get from rosters that did not think hard enough about what they left exposed. The franchise that was built on other teams' discarded pieces is now the franchise having its pieces taken away. That is not a criticism. That is just the beautiful, brutal continuity of how this league works. Every team that survives long enough eventually sits on both sides of this table. Indiana sat on the taking side in 2000. They're sitting on the giving side in 2026. The sport keeps rotating, keeps building, keeps expanding. And somewhere in Portland and Toronto, a new generation of fans is about to experience the same thing Indiana fans felt 26 years ago. The electricity of a brand new team. The excitement of watching something be built from nothing. The hope that one of those expansion picks becomes the next Tamika Catchings. It is a good thing for women's basketball that this is happening, even if it stings for Indiana right now. Caitlin Clark's role in all of this. One element of this story that deserves its own moment is how visible Caitlin Clark has been throughout this entire situation. She has not been quiet. She has not let the front office handle the public narrative alone while she keeps her head down. Her social media interaction with Cunningham was genuine and transparent and made clear to anyone paying attention exactly how Clark feels about having her back. That kind of public advocacy from a franchise player for a teammate is rare. And it matters because Clark is not just Indiana's best player. She is Indiana's most powerful voice in any negotiation. When Caitlin Clark publicly signals that she wants a player back, it sends a message to that player and to the rest of the league. It says this team is a destination. It says the best player in the sport wants to play alongside you. For Cunningham, even if she ends up being selected in the expansion draft, that message from Clark likely factors heavily into whatever decision she makes next about where she wants to play long-term. Players want to be wanted, and Caitlin Clark made sure Sophie Cunningham knows exactly how wanted she is in Indiana. That relationship, that genuine friendship built over one incomplete season, is also part of what makes the expansion draft situation so charged. This is not a business transaction between two strangers. This is a decision that directly affects people who genuinely care about each other. And that human element is layered underneath every contract figure and protection slot calculation being discussed inside Indiana's front office right now. What happens next and why April 3rd changes everything. Today is the deadline. Protection lists are due today, March 29th. By the time this video reaches you, the Fever's 5 names have already been submitted to the league office. The decision has already been made. There's no going back, no last-minute swap, no change of heart that gets accommodated. The list is locked. On April 3rd, the expansion draft airs live on ESPN. Portland and Toronto step to the podium and start making picks. And in that moment, everything Indiana has been calculating and projecting and hoping for either holds up or it does not. Either Portland and Toronto look at the Fever's exposed list and find more urgent targets elsewhere. Cunningham clears the draft untouched, hits free agency, and comes home to Indiana on a new deal under the new CBA. Or one of those franchises calls her name, and Indiana watches the player Caitlin Clark beg to come back, walk out of their world for nothing. Natasha Howard and the one piece of good news. In a situation this stressful, Indiana fans deserve at least one reason to breathe. And there is one. Natasha Howard is not eligible for the 2026 expansion draft. Under the rules, a player who has already been cored twice during her career has exceeded the limit and cannot be selected by an expansion franchise. Howard has hit that threshold, which means Portland and Toronto cannot touch her, and Indiana does not need to spend one of their 5 protection slots on her. She is safe by rule, not by choice, and that distinction matters enormously. It frees up a slot Indiana can use elsewhere. In a situation where every single protection spot carries enormous weight, having one name removed from the equation without using a slot is a genuine advantage. But let us be honest about what that changes. It does not solve the core problem. The Fever still have 6 players worth protecting and only 5 spots. Howard's ineligibility prevents Indiana's situation from being even worse than it already is, but it does not prevent it from being painful. The math remains the same. Someone who matters is getting left exposed. The no compensation reality that will hurt the most. Here is the part Indiana fans have to sit with, because it is unlike almost anything else in professional sports. When a team loses a quality player to a trade, there is something coming back. When a player leaves in free agency, she at least chose to go. Even a roster cut has a story behind it. The expansion draft strips all of that away. If an expansion team calls Sophie Cunningham's name on April 3rd, Indiana gets nothing. 0. No draft pick heading the other way. No player swap. No salary offset. No conversation. She is on Indiana's roster one day, and she belongs to Portland or Toronto the next, and the Fever have absolutely no recourse. There is no middle ground on April 3rd. There is no partial outcome. Either the bet pays off or it does not. And every Fever fan watching that ESPN broadcast live is going to be holding their breath from the moment the first pick is announced until the moment Sophie Cunningham's name either gets called or does not. If it does not get called, Indiana exhales, re-signs her under the new CBA, and heads into the 2026 season with the full group intact and a roster that looks genuinely dangerous around Caitlin Clark. The gamble worked. The math held. The front office got it right. If her name does get called, Indiana reevaluates. They look at what is left. They look at free agency. They look at whether the cost-controlled asset they chose to protect over a fan favorite actually delivers the value they projected. They move forward because they have to. But the sting of watching Cunningham in a different jersey, the sting of knowing Clark asked her to run it back, and the answer was not theirs to give, that does not disappear quickly. That becomes part of the franchise's story. A chapter nobody in Indiana wanted to write. Strip away all the emotion for a moment and look at what Indiana's front office actually did here. They made a decision that prioritizes long-term roster construction over short-term certainty. They protected a developing player with cost-controlled years remaining over a fan favorite who has already proven herself. They bet that the player they love will come back on her own, and that the player they protected will grow into the piece that makes Indiana a legitimate championship contender for the next 2 to 3 seasons. That is not a coward's move. That is not negligence. That is a front office doing exactly what front offices are supposed to do, making difficult calls based on the full picture rather than what feels safe in the moment. Amber Cox and the staff around her are not indifferent to the human side of this. They understand what Cunningham means to Clark, to the locker room, to the fan base. They made this call anyway because they believe it is right for the franchise in the long run. Whether it turns out to be right is a question that only April 3rd can answer, and then only time can confirm. The 2026 WNBA season will tell the real story. Either Indiana comes out of the expansion draft intact and enters the year with genuine championship momentum, or they absorb a painful loss and spend the offseason regrouping around whatever the new version of this roster looks like. But one thing is certain. No matter how April 3rd plays out, the Indiana Fever built something real this past season. The chemistry between Clark and Cunningham, the defensive identity Hull brought, the scoring punch Mitchell delivered when everything was on the line. That was not an accident. That was a team forming an identity. And whether every piece of it survives this draft or not, that foundation is worth building on. The expansion draft does not determine Indiana's future. It is just the next obstacle on the road to where this team is trying to go. And Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Michaela Timpson, Kelsey Mitchell, and Lexi Hull are still there regardless of what happens. That is still a core built to compete. Whatever comes next, Indiana is not starting over. They are adapting. And for a franchise that came out an expansion draft 26 years ago with nothing, that perspective matters. The clock is ticking toward April 3rd. 5 protection slots, 6 players who mattered, 1 decision already made, and 1 night that will determine whether Indiana's biggest gamble of the offseason paid off or cost them the one thing Caitlin Clark cared most about having back. That is the 2026 WNBA expansion draft. And if you want to be here the moment Portland and Toronto make their picks on April 3rd, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. The full draft night reaction is coming the moment the selections are announced. You're not going to want to be late for that one.